Hello again, boys and girls. It's Morales, and this is 34.2 Global War. We're talking about World War One, Chapter 34.2. Understand the brutality of the fighting, importance technology played, understand how World War One became a total war. Make sure you know total war, and understand how World War One became a world war, what it means to be a world war. So it becomes a war of attrition. After the war breaks out, it's quickly going to be realized that this is not going to be a battle or a war fought by territory or strategy. It's going to be what's called a war of attrition. Attrition means whoever's going to can lose the most will win. Whoever can lose the least will lose. So there's going to be two fronts, the Western Front and Eastern Front. That's the fighting part of Europe. There's still going to be parts of fought in Africa and then Asia as well. It's part of the world future. But the main fighting is in Europe, in France on the west, and then in the German-Russian border on the east. Real quickly, they try to carry out their plans. In particular, the French try to do their Plan 17 attack. It doesn't work too well because they're a bit disorganized and not really. They got the potential to be something, but they don't really have the organization that they need for this. But then there's the Germans who have the Schlesien plan, and they have a little bit of complications with that, carrying out, bringing the numbers up front because it's just too overwhelming for the transportation system at the time. But they are able to manage to go through Belgium, which is an independent nation that was to be protected by Britain, and they go north and then west to attack France. And remember, that was their plan. Attack France, get them out of the picture, and then focus on Russia because they're afraid of Russia and its potential, but not too afraid because they're not really ready at that time. In the east, there's more moving back and forth. In the west it becomes a stalemate. As soon as the trench lines go down and the people can't attack across the no man's land, it becomes a battle of yards and inches, and every day tons of fighting without much results. On the east, the movement's going to be much more fluid. In other words, the front's in one spot on one day, and it could be 20 miles to the east the next day, or 20 miles to the west the next day. So there's going to be a lot of transition, and that one on the east is going to end sooner because of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Probably not saying it right, but it's the treaty that ends the war between Russia and Germany, gives Germany a big chunk of some of the territory, but pulls Russia out of the war, and that's the one done with the new Bolsheviks in power. Alright, so the technology is a big factor for the war. I've seen a couple questions on it on the test, but I don't think it's a big thing that you're going to see. But it's pretty accessible. First of all, the barbed wire and the Gatling gun. In the past, remember, the guns were bore muzzle guns that didn't shoot too well, but now muskets, and now they have better weapons and technology that shoot a lot better and are aiming better. So previous wars have been fought by muskets. Now these other ones are going to be having repeating rifles and Gatling guns, which is an extension or a version of a machine gun, and those are going to be terrible. Then there's going to be the use of gas, which had already been used before to some extent, but now it's going to be popular and used quite a bit. First used by the Germans in 1915, but then the British use it, the French use it. Everyone's going to start using it, and mustard gas is just one of them because it's one of the gases. It's called mustard gas because it drops off a yellow canister, develops a yellow smoke, and supposedly that's the one that kind of eats you from the inside out and inside, and also burns your skin from the outside. But once it gets inside you, it attacks your lungs and the mucus, and so that you can't breathe and stuff like that, and you get asphyxiated. But the problem is that it take anywhere from 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks to die if that's going to happen to you, or you're really, really messed up for life. To deal with the trenches, they're going to develop tanks, and the first ones work okay a little bit. Actually, the first ones are terrible, but then once they get a model that kind of works, they work alright. But then the strategy is very quickly able to adjust to the use of tanks by building different types of trenches that will ruin the tank. And then the first use of airplanes in war are going to be quite limited. So these are the Snoopy Woodstock planes with the two wings, one wing on top of the other type of items. Uh, they really don't have much firepower. They have a little gun that they can use on it, but it's not that huge. Um, but what they do is what they do what they are useful is for spying on the location of the enemy. So they fly over them, notice them, jot it down where they are on the map, and then go back and tell them about it. And then dirigibles, I don't know if I said that. That's just a blimp, and so it's a big, huge blimp. I think your book tells a story about them dropping a bomb on France, and it killed one person or a cow or something like that. So essentially, kind of useless. Could easily be taken out. And then finally, our last thing, the submarines. That's the technology that is real effective and has a big story in it because the Germans start to develop it because they can't maintain or keep up against the British Navy, who has just too much firepower. So they go underwater and do the surprise sneak attacks, blowing up people, and blowing up British ships, and also blowing up ships dedicated or headed toward Germany with war supplies, any type of supplies. Headed for Britain. The longer that Britain can get stuff, the longer they can maintain the war. And if it's a war of attrition, whoever can maintain going, keep it going, will win, while the other one has to tap out. Okay. So this is a trench warfare. There's a big spiel on it that I've done before in the past, but here's just a couple pictures of the trenches and what they look like. If you go to YouTube, there's quite a few sites. I think I got one listed here for what you might want to change, or might want to look up on YouTube. There's tons of them to see. What I want to point out is the brutality of the war. This war is unlike any other war before, and people cannot believe or understand the severity of the death that's going to be involved. So one typical example is this thing called Verdun, in which the Germans attack the French, and the French are able to hold off. But in just this battle, 315 French are killed, 315,000 French are killed, 280,000 Germans. Just one of those is a complete war, like in the past with the Napoleonic Wars. In that battle, because of the massive amounts of cannons that are used, long-range big field guns, they don't even cover 1,600 bodies. They're just pulverized into the earth. They're disintegrated. They can't see where they are. Can't tell the difference between feet and toes and feet and hands and stuff like that. It's all thrown in there. So to deal with it, they kind of just covered up the fields with dirt and put grave markers there, which may or may not be anywhere near the person that died there. Okay, the Somme is another example, and then this one's I'm a little bitter about it because of all the fighting that it took. Okay, the British only able to gain a few thousand yards of territory. In other words, they fought and killed 420,000 soldiers to try to gain 10 football fields. 420,000 people. These two battles in particular show the challenge that's going to happen, where the new technology is going to face the old fighting, where people got up and charged to a straight line, knowing that the other group would be able to shoot once, twice, maybe 3 times by the time they got there, and the guys could overpower them. Yes, they'll lose some people along the way, but they'll get there. Well, now with the machine guns, one guy can hold off 100, 200 people if the machine gun's placed in the correct spot, and they're able to rotate the gun around. Okay, here's our Great War in Europe and Southwest Asia. So I'll point out a couple things. Here's the Eastern Front. Okay, and it shifts from over here to over here, and then back to over here, and back to over here, but then this way and this way, and it pushes into this part right here, where eventually the Russians, the new government there, pulls them out of the war. The Eastern Front is the one that gets a lot of publicity. So here is the North Sea, and here's Switzerland. They said basically there's a series of trenches between the German troops on one side and the French troops on the other, and that's essentially it. And notice that here Italy is in orangish because they soon switch sides. The war Allies in the midst of the war. All right, the total war. this is a big deal. I anticipate seeing more of this stuff on the test. Okay, so total war is a different war than the past. In the past, when the war was fought, the soldiers got recruited. You may be affected if that happened. Okay, most likely you're not, and then they would go and go out to fight the battle, and they'd go to a place, and it was maybe near a town but away from the town. It'd be a key aspect or a key place around the town that has some sort of help to fight the war. Okay, and now it's going to be wherever the war is, or wherever people are, that's where the war is. This is total war. Okay, and it's during this time that they developed the concept, what they call the home front. How can the home fight? How can the home help out? So how can the women, how can the kids, how can the other groups of people, can they help contribute to the war effort? And this becomes a big thing, because if people support the war, they'll work hard and they won't demand a whole bunch of things. They're not going to go crazy. But in the reality, they do go crazy in parts and hold up production, and that's when the government steps in and says, hey, you guys can't do that. We're in a war. Suck it up and deal with it. So one of the things that happens is the government's going to take lots of control of the economies. They say, hey, this factory, you are building weapons that we need, and if you don't, then we will send the owner to prison, and he will hang out in prison with a guy named Bubba, who is very, very big and very touchy-feely for that guy. Anyways, in the factories, they're going to start to make lots of munitions, and in there, since many of the men are off to fighting, women are going to get a chance to join the workforce in important and valuable jobs, but of course they're not going to be paid much, because that's a whole different story. Also, the Germans are the first to start bombing of civilian places, but they're not the only ones. It's going to be quickly repeated by the British, the French, and other groups, because they wanted to make the other people say, uncle. How do you do that? Stop their ability to fight. How do you stop their ability to fight? Stop them from getting food, stop them from getting supplies. Okay, and then the soldiers will have to give up because they don't have what they need. All this comes along with a big aspect of what we see is what we call propaganda. Propaganda is kind of like advertisement to try to create or get a sense of reaction from people to support a cause, to support an idea, support a person. So there's one of my favorite posters, and this is a typical. This is made by the U.S. Army, and if you notice down the bottom, it says U.S. Army enlist. It says destroy the mad brute. And you notice that this King Kong looking guy, he's got a stick called culture. Okay, and then in the background there's some ruined cities, and then in his arm is the maiden. Boys, you must protect the maiden. You have to be Prince Charming. And who do you think is the ape-looking guy? That's right, he's the evil Germans who are about to abduct, and who knows what they might be doing with that woman. Okay, so this is supposed to encourage people to join the war, and that's based on stereotypes. It helps us set stereotypes where we believe that the Germans are Huns and brutal. Well, it comes from World War I. The irony is that some of the posters were going to be told stretch some truths, or in the newspaper the stories were not completely responded or reported as accurate, and then people get a sense of disbelief for these posters and the propaganda saying, oh, it's not as bad, it's not as bad, it's not as bad. So when they hear reports later on that the Germans are killing the Jews, oh, that's an exaggerated thing, okay, we don't really believe it, okay, and they don't make much effort to do something about it. Okay, global involvement, this one's pretty simple. Since they have colonies, they get to help out, or they're forced to help out. So the British are going to have Australia, New Zealand, and Canada help out, and they call them the Anzacs. And in particular, usually they be a big percentage of the force that's fighting in a particular area. So in one area, the British are fighting for a territory called Gallipoli, which would give them control of the Dardanelles, which helped to end the involvement of the Ottomans, because the Ottomans would be stuck, and also open up trade for their Russian allies. Throughout the world, the Japanese, they get involved in China. They join the British and the French and start to attack German possessions there, and they want to take over more chunks of China, and that's when they issue the 21 demands, because the Europeans are involved, and they say to China, follow these 21 demands and we won't beat you up. And that's it. So anyways, back to the 21 demands. Part of the demands were taken by China, and part of them were not accepted. And Japan jumps in on the British side because they know that the British are more powerful at that time in the in China or throughout the world, and so they don't want to mess with them, but they are going to take the German stuff and try to take them for their own. China does eventually give in to some of the demands, but not all the demands.